I'm Connor Rebush, and if you are interested in the finer points of face punching, you've come to the right place. This is Heavy Hands. Hello and welcome to another episode of Heavy Hands. I am your host, just plain Mr. Connor Rebush, joined by my illustrious co-host, officially Dr. Patrick Wyman. But there is a guest even more exciting than that with us today, one that we have been looking forward to having onto this show for a long time. We are joined by UFC flyweight champion Demetrious Mighty Mouse Johnson. Demetrious, thank you so much for coming on to talk with us today.
Hey, man, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And we've been looking forward to talking to you for a long time because I think both Pat and I, and probably a lot of other people in the sport, Joe Rogan is famous for saying how he always thinks you're the best in the sport right now. But Pat and I both admire, in particular, your ability to transition. In fact, I don't think there's anybody in MMA who grasps transitional fighting the way that you do, whether it's from striking to wrestling, from striking into the clinch, from the clinch to the ground, from the ground into strikes, even from long range into short range. There aren't any barriers in the way that you see fighting. So the first thing we wanted to talk to you about was how that came about. How do you train to flow so seamlessly between those phases and ranges in the midst of something as hectic as a fist fight?
Well, all this stuff wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for my coach, Matt Hume, and his outlook on how mixed martial arts or fighting in general is viewed. And I've been with him for 10 years straight, so I'm not the type of guy who goes around and cross-trains and does all this stuff because I don't believe in it. I believe I have found the fountain of youth with Matt Hume when it comes to mixed martial arts, and that's what he's ingrained in me since day one.
So in the past, you've kind of spoken of a certain flowchart approach to fighting. Like there was in a recent fan Q&A, you talked about how you developed the approach that got you to beat John Dodson in your second matchup. So there was a sequence that was just brilliant. You grabbed a single leg in the middle of the cage but couldn't finish. A little while later, you grabbed another single leg, and this time you used it to push him to the fence, but he managed to keep his balance there. The third time when you grabbed the single and pushed him to the fence and he went to defend it, you hit him a number of times. You reached up and elbowed him right in the face and then continued with this sequence afterwards. So with something like that, is there a planned element to that, or is that just a read that you see in the fight and then build on it, or is it some combination?
That's a combination of both. One is called fighter IQ. And you only build fighter IQ by having a lot of fight time and training with guys coaches who have fighter IQ as well. Because you go in the gym and pound your body into the ground every single day, but when you get a coach who has the fighter IQ and who's athletic, who can train with you, then you can start picking games that are like, okay, you spar for, you do 5-5, and throughout those those rounds, you can be like, okay, my coach goes, okay, what did I hit you with this round? What was landing successfully for you? That way you're not just sparring and letting your adrenaline take over. You're actually knowing which shots are landing, you're knowing where your feet are being placed, all that stuff. Now when it comes from sequences, there's no sequence. I like I said, it comes back to fighter IQ. All the stuff I hit him with the spin back elbow, that's stuff I've already trained and I've had in my toolbox. So I'm able to dig in my toolbox because I have such a great fighter IQ. Like, this is going to be able to work here, and I'm going to pull it out, whack him with it.
So, Demetrious, when you train, when you have a round of sparring, for example, do you approach that strategically the way you would a fight? Do you end a round in training and you and Matt or you and whoever's in your corner for that round will talk to you about how to adjust for the next one?
Nope. I just make adjustments on my own. Typically, when I'm sparring, it's just, open mat. I'm not, not like sparring where I have a headgear on and I will come to the corner and that's there with a water bottle squirting water in my mouth. It's not like that. I'll spar, then I'll assess the situation myself. I've been me Matt sparred yesterday, and I was asking him, I was like, this happened, and I was trying to compete and do this to you. And he goes, well, I'm going to react whatever you do, because if I tell you, if you would react to this way, I would have done something different. So it's always, it's a loop, the way our system is set up. So, but yeah.
Now you spoke about your relationship with Matt Hume. That strikes me as a very unique one in MMA. You guys seem to have a very distinct, a tight bond that is kind of rare between that and trainer and coach. Can you give us a little insight into the background of your relationship, of how you two came to kind of be such an expected pair?
Yeah, I started training in mixed martial arts at a gym, at his gym, at a satellite gym, which was about where I live now, about 15 minutes away now. But at the time I lived in Lakewood, which is about 45 minutes away from Auburn. So I trained at Vision Quest. It was a gym, basically, the very first gym I was at, I had, 2 big wrestling mats. You'd go to lift weights, had a punch bag, a ring. It was just the complete gym. And yeah, I satellite school there, and I started training there, doing mixed martial arts. Didn't care about the UFC. Didn't care about being champion, and I started training. And next thing you know, I did an amateur fight on one of his amateur cards. And he sat there and watched me fight. And then next thing moved forward, I started training a little more under the gym, and things just kept going the way they are. And now that I'm professional, we train together, we spar each other, and I respect him and his skills, and he respects my skills. And when you have a coach that can train with you and you compete, it just makes, because I trust what he says, and he understands what I'm going through with my body. And I came to the gym and he goes, okay, what hurts on you? And I was like, okay, this hurts, this hurts, this hurts. And he goes, okay, well, let's try to do something where it's not going to aggravate that and still push our heart rate. So he listens to me and still pushes me at the same time.
It seems like one of the constants that we hear about really good, productive relationships between fighters and coaches is one where open communication is where the communication is really open, where you can be honest and tell the coach how you feel on a day-to-day basis, and vice versa, that they can be honest with you. So when you get a new opponent, like, what is your joint process of preparation look like? Do you sit down and talk about the opponent? Do you watch film together? How does that work for you and Matt?
A little bit of everything. We watch film together, and I think that trust, you have to build that over time. And there came a point in time in my training to where I never told Matt how my body was feeling and all that stuff until we're both in the surgery room, and I'm getting surgery on my shoulder. And he goes, dude, you got to tell me this stuff, man. Like, if you would tell me about your shoulder or this and that, we wouldn't be here at Dr. Calpain's office going into surgery right now. So just be open with me. And I know you're not a pussy, so I know you achieved that a long time ago. I know you're not going to bitch out and work out, so be open with me. So I kind of gained that trust, and I'll never take advantage of it. But when it's time to get ready for the next fight, we sit down and watch a video of the guy, and then we start, going about making us the best fighter we could be on July, my next fight, July 30th.
So you've spoken a lot, Demetrious, about your relationship with Matt Hume. You talk about how it's about you being open about how you're feeling, and you just said that you try to make sure you're the best fighter you can be. I'm curious to know, because in the past you have said that you do not game plan for specific opponents. Is that actually true?
Yeah. I mean, I think game plans, you look at your opponent and you see what he's going to do. You look at your opponent and you see what he's going to do. Mm-hmm. And once you realize that, then you kind of get the adjust, okay, this is what this guy's going to do. Then after that, you go in there. Like, a lot of people ask, hey, what was the good way to beat John Dodson the second time? I was like, basically just still stand in front of him. That's the only chance he has to knock me out. He has to with that one punch to knock me out. Other than that, is Doc going to go in there and shoot a double leg on me? No. Is he going to go in there and try to clinch me? No. If he does, I'm good in the clinch. If he wants to wrestle, we can wrestle. So when you're well-rounded, there's no reason to have a game plan. You just got to make sure you know what your opponent's going to do well. That when you get in an octagon, it just takes that much time. It just doesn't take that much time to get the beat on them, and that's why you guys always see me do very well in my rematch. It's like, perfect. I already had the time for the last time we fought. And people don't change. People don't give their time and growth to change to where my amateur career is very, very, very long. So I'm able to go into a fight and just adjust, and I'm always changing because I'm with Matt Hume. Matt Hume isn't just a striking coach or a grappling coach or this and this. He does all that shit.
So I wonder if there's maybe a difference of terminology, because you say you don't game plan, which I gather means you don't come up with a big cohesive strategy, but you do look at opponents and try to find out where their danger zones are, for example, or in what ways they're going to threaten you, and organize the way you're going to fight around that?
Yeah, not organize how we're going to fight around it, but just organize how we're going to make it just go about the way, the most efficient way, I should say, with like example, you look at Henry Cejudo, he loves, I'm not going to divulge this one, but there's certain ways Henry Cejudo likes to go about his fights. And the way he went about it, it made me develop a new skill in my toolbox. And I was like, so I can use this tool. I have this tool now. I can't use this tool on a different person because the way they do a certain thing, I have to develop a different style from this tool. So, like I said, it's not like a certain game plan, but I prepare myself with the tools that need to be in my arsenal to take my opponent out.
So speaking of Henry Cejudo, I mean, that fight really highlighted the quality of your clinch game. Like that's been a consistent thing ever since the first John Dodson fight. But it seems like it's been getting better and better. And it took you under 2 minutes to beat an Olympic gold medalist in his area of strength. And that was just kind of a shocking thing. But it seemed like you could see that same kind of flowcharty quality to trying things out on the fly and figuring out what's working and what's not. And especially with the way that you were using your hand positioning and your footwork in the clinch, that it seemed like you figured him out really quickly. So how did this clinch game come about? Like, where is this something that you worked on extensively with Hume? Was it something that you sharpen up for specific fights?
Just consistently working on him. We worked the clinch game last night, guys. I take Muay Thai classes on Tuesday, and after sparring, so we're working on the clinch, or we're teaching other people at our gym a nasty clinch game. And you can go to the gym and different gyms like, oh, I'm gonna work clinch game. Here's the Muay Thai plum and all this stuff. But we have a secret science the way we do our clinch work, which you guys will never know unless you train at AMC. And I never said anything about how it works out.
The reason to sign up. It's a good sales pitch.
What's that? Well, I'm just being honest, like, and that was told last time. He goes, you see people go to Thai like, oh, I'm going to work on my clinch and I'm going to skip knees and I got the plum. No, there's way more to clinching about just having the plum and throwing knees, as you're going to tell when I fight. So, and I've been working on my clinch, for a long time. And another reason why my clinch is so good is because I train with another person who has a way better clinch than I do, which makes my clinch just that much better. And I'm dealing with a man who weighs 174 pounds. When I get in the octagon, I'm fighting guys who weigh 140 pounds at the most after they weigh in at 125. So whatever you guys saw me do to him, if you don't, Matt Hume does that to me on a daily basis when we spar.
So one of the other things that stands out about the clinch kind of being an area of expertise for you is that it's not an area we see many small fighters dominate in, and that's kind of a trademark of yours because you also have phenomenal ground control in a division where, compared to something like middleweight, light heavyweight, heavyweight, fighters tend to bounce back to their feet very quickly. There's just not as much mass to hold them down. How do you account for your completely unique ability at flyweight to control people in the clinch, to control them on the ground, to hold them where you want them to be so that you can apply your strengths?
Like I said, train with Matt Hume. Like I said, when I tell you guys, whatever I do, it's me, Matt Hume, and Brad Curtin. And Brad Curtin, he's been training with Matt Hume since he was 16, I believe. He's 34, 35 now. So, like I said, man, you go to all these other gyms, and they have, oh, hey, I'm the Mick coach here. Oh, hey, I'm the jiu-jitsu coach here. Oh, hey, I'm the dietitian coach at this gym. There's none of that in my gym. There's me. There's other guys who train there, the AMC squad and, up-and-comer guys. But it's just the head honchos in the kitchen is Matt and Brad. Other than that, there's nobody else. There's no dietitian. There's no jiu-jitsu coach. We do have a jiu-jitsu coach, but I don't train with him because I'm not in that phase in my life where I'm just training gi. Not saying that he doesn't have the skill set to teach me anything new, but my type of career that I'm in right now, I need Matt Hume's style of teaching is going to be the best for me because it's about, jiu-jitsu. It's a slow, methodical game in the gi. When you're fighting in UFC, you start on your feet, and next thing you know, you have 2 minutes left on the ground. And so, like I said, man, I think that I benefit from having two coaches, and one of the coaches has been with the main coach since he was 16. So his learning and his ways of teaching is all Matt Hume as well.
Mm-hmm. So that's really interesting. It seems like that's definitely a thing in MMA now. Is there's a lot less specialization and more coaches talk about themselves as MMA coaches rather than bringing some specific discipline to the table. But that flows through into your approach. You mentioned this earlier. Without there being barriers between the various phases of the fight. One thing that stands out, regardless of what phase we're talking about, though, whether we're talking about wrestling or the clinch or striking, is how well you use the space of the cage, and especially how well you use the fence and how well you drive guys towards the fence, whether that's with the single leg, like we talked about earlier, or with your pressure footwork and your use of kicks to cut off the space of the cage. Do you think of yourself as a pressure fighter? Do you feel like you do your best work moving forward?
I think anybody does their best work moving forward. I mean, anybody who backs up, when's the last time you saw somebody win a fight backing up? I mean, you don't win fights backing up. You don't win fights. You do win fights when you dance around and you're trying to outpoint your opponent. But for me, my goal is going to fucking put people away and ram my knees to the stomach, like really just demobilize my opponent. And so that's what you guys are starting to see from me. And I have to disagree. One of the things you just said. You said that nowadays you see people specialize or they're more fluid. I think I can't remember what you exactly said, but it kind of like went a light bulb off my head. I think nowadays you don't see you see coaches who specialize in one area where it's like, I just grapple. That's my only thing I know how to do. Or I just wrestle. I'm a wrestling coach. And you have these guys have these, for a good example, it works for John Jones, but John Jones has wrestling coach, which is Izzy. Then he has Six Guns Gibbons, which is his pad coach. Then he has John Rico John. Then he has Greg Jackson. And so all those guys are specialized in one area. So it's like if Rico John and Izzy were to do an MMA fight, you're going to see two complete athlete, different parts to where Rico John is going to be a stand-up into, if they fought, I would give it to Izzy because Izzy will get it to the ground and be able to maul him to death. Or you look at Duke Rufus, he's a stand-up coach. So you see Anthony Pettis going out to train with Izzy wrestling to where if you were to fight Matt Hume, you're like, okay, perfect. We want to have this fight standing. You want to start on the feet? You want to start on the ground? You want to grapple? You want to clinch? You want to box? Matt can do it all. And that's why I think that's what's made me so successful and keep on growing as an athlete or a martial artist because my coach has no limits. He has no barriers.
So do you think the fact that
and not saying that other coaches do have barriers or they have a limit, but Matt Hume has competed in Muay Thai before. He's competed in boxing. He's competed in Muay Thai. He's competed in Abu Dhabi and he's done well. He tore his ACL in Abu Dhabi and still won the match. So Matt Hume has competed in all the disciplines in mixed martial arts to where I will go out on a limb saying that I'm not sure if other coaches out there are coaches out there like Andre Pinares, Hato Cordero. Those guys have competed in other sports, but the likelihood of, I don't know all the coaches out there have done it, but I'm pretty sure Matt Hume is probably the guy who's done all those things and competed in Abu Dhabi and Muay Thai fights and et cetera.
Yeah, I was thinking especially of guys like Rafael Cordero, who like when you ask them now, even though he has a reputation as being a stand-up coach, he very explicitly thinks of himself as being an MMA coach. And Firas Zahabi too, and guys like that. But you're right. There, especially at the big camps, it seems like there are more specific coaches for things like striking and wrestling and jiu-jitsu, and you may have a head coach who brings all those things together, but there's still the individual disciplines are still being trained as individual disciplines to some extent.
Exactly, and there's that disconnect. And it's not a bad thing. But like I said, the way I throw my jab, the way I throw my cross, the way I throw my knees, some of like, oh man, you don't want to throw your knees like you get taken down. I'm like, that's fine. If I get taken down, I can elevate, get them off me, and then continue to push forward with my knees and my pressure fighting. And hi, Tyron. I can still do my, use my footwork and hit people, but now I'm just evolving my game to the point where it's like I'm making the person miss, and when they miss, I'm making them pay dearly for it instead of making them miss and hitting them once. Then they miss me, or I get inside, I get to where I need to be, or I want to be, then I make it a short night for myself and that person as well.
Demetrious, do you worry at all if specific areas of technique might suffer? Because some might say that having very specific disciplines with their coaches, having a wrestling coach, having a boxing coach, some even have a kickboxing coach in addition to a boxing coach. Do you think that might give them an area where, if stuck in a particular phase, that's a strength of theirs, where you might not have as much depth in those particular areas?
No, not at all, because at the end of the day, the fight's always evolving. The fight's always be put in a different area. So, like, if I was to go in a K1 fight, just straight kickboxing, I could say a guy who just trains specifically K1 kickboxing is going to have a better grasp of kickboxing with me. But in mixed martial arts, the game's always changing. It's not like we go out there and it's like, okay, the first 2 minutes is only boxing, go. Okay, next 2 minutes is only wrestling, go. And the last minute is whatever you want to do. That's how it is. In mixed martial arts, it's, okay, you get 5 minutes, may the best art win or whatever. So for me, go ahead.
No, please continue.
On mixed martial arts, I don't have to, if I go against a guy who's a way, way better kickboxer than I am, I'm like, okay, perfect, you're better kickboxing, then I'll just box you and get close distance, and then, take you down, and then what are you going to do then? Or, when you get up, now I'm in the right range I need to be, now I can start letting you take some of my kickboxing. So there's so many, that's why I tell people, mixed martial arts is the easiest sport in the world, because you can have people who are one-sided discipline and become champions. I mean, you look at Brock Lesnar, he became a UFC world champion, and his main discipline is wrestling. To whereas, it's very hard to become a champion in boxing because it's one discipline focus. But in mixed martial arts, you can have guys like, dude, I'm a Muay Thai fighter. My hands are so fucking good that nobody can get past it. And you have guys who become world champions in the mixed martial arts based on one discipline, and that's why they don't keep their belt as long, because anything can happen, honestly. But you might run up to somebody who goes, you know what, you're a badass Muay Thai fighter, but I'm a very fucking sick wrestler. I'm going to maul you to death. So in boxing, it's boxing, wrestling, all those other sports are way harder than mixed martial arts, because you have to get good at one discipline, and guess what? That other person is just as good at that discipline too.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Like one of the metaphors that we use to talk about transitions, especially because that's basically, I mean, it feels like that's basically what you keep coming back to here, is the idea of that you don't have to get stuck in one phase. You always have transitions that you can go to. Those transitions are the connective tissue between the muscles that are every individual discipline. And like the difference between there are guys in MMA who are very good at transitions, but then if they get stuck in an individual phase for any amount of time, they're in trouble. Like Sage Northcutt's last fight when he lost to Brian Barberina. Like Sage Northcutt is all connective tissue. Like every individual phase, there isn't a whole lot there. But like even if you got stuck in an individual phase for a little while, you still have more than enough to go until you can get back to a transition where you might feel a little more comfortable.
Yeah, I guess you could say that, and I would say the same thing for Sage Northcutt. It just, he ran into a guy that could take a shot and who wasn't, Sage Northcutt, he's very, very, very athletic. So that is his first thing. He's very explosive. He's able to get off on people and not wrestle them. So when he ran into Barberina, a guy who's tough, gritty, who will fight tooth and nail, and who's going to be there for the whole fight, it brings to things. Sometimes, we had some amateurs who fought this weekend, and Matt was like, you guys don't have to rush, take your time, take your time, set your things up, land the high kicks, build your fighter IQ. Sage Northcutt's still young, so he hasn't built his fighter IQ. If he would win that fight, he goes, okay, I hit this guy with my hardest shot. Okay, he didn't go down. Okay, perfect. I'm back off the gas a little bit and start working on my footwork. But then again, now I have to look at it. That Sage Northcutt have that in his toolbox, where he can recognize, goes, holy shit, I hit that guy with everything I had, and you get knocked out. Well, okay, do I keep load up on everything? Almost like Conor McGregor when he fought Nate Diaz, when he hit him with that left shot, and Conor was like, dude, I was very inefficient with my energy. If I would have gone up there and blasted him once, then okay, he's still up. Okay, I'm gonna blast him again. He's still up. Okay, I'm gonna dial back the blasting and just move around, use my footwork, and just pick him apart until I feel comfortable to where I have the energy to start blasting again. That's all. It's just fighter IQ.
Mm-hmm. Well, you've spoken a lot about knockouts and finishes. You said earlier, Demetrious, how you like to go in there, and you spoke in very vivid terms about loving to drive your knee into somebody's gut. That's a thing we don't see from a lot of champions. We've seen repeatedly very violent, dynamic finishers who become champions, and then their high finish rate kind of goes away. We've seen it with John Jones. We saw it with Jose Aldo. It happens over and over. And you, on the other hand, are one of the rare guys who has actually become apparently more dangerous since winning the belt. You've finished the challenger in 5 of your 8 title defenses. To what do you attribute that seemingly newfound ability to kind of put guys away with ease?
Just, like I said, train with that and staying focused, staying hungry, staying motivated to stay on top and to keep on displaying my mixed martial arts skills. I mean, like I said, man, when I'm training, there's no game plan. So it's like, okay, this is the game plan. Let's stay away from here and do this and this and this. Just go out there and fight and then see where it goes, and that's it. So for me, the last couple matches I've been fighting, they worked out perfectly in my favor, and I'm able to execute what I want to do in there, and that's all it is.
So shifting gears a little bit, your last loss was to Dominic Cruz, who regained and then defended his bantamweight title. Is that a rematch that you want? Is that, and if so, like, how do you think you've changed since then? How would you see that kind of fight going today?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a rematch that I hope I get to have down the road. But my first and foremost thing I want to do is try to set the record for most consecutive title defense. And I believe I changed tremendously. For one, I was only training that 2 days a week, and then I was off doing my own thing. And another thing is that the thing is tough. Dom, obviously, he's a way bigger dude than I am. I had a full meal last night, ate whatever I want, and even had banana bread or whatever. So I can't remember. And then I had watermelon during the night. I had some coconut pops last night. Not coconut pops, some coconut sparkling water is what it's called. Coconut sparkling water, and I woke up weighing 140 pounds. So I'm sure he's a way bigger dude. And he's also taller, so he has the range, the reach, the weight. So it's a definitely different it's a hard task to tackle, but I believe with the right training and, just going in there and make sure I'm ready. And I changed drastically. You can tell from his last time when he fought Uriah Faber to where I fight guys now. And it could be because I'm fighting guys who are my size and I'm able to do the things I want to. Like, will I be able to mantle Dominic Cruz in the clinch? No, probably not, but maybe I can. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into it. But, if the fight happens, I'm very excited to go out there and test myself.
That's one we're looking forward to seeing. Our last topic for you, Demetrious, before we let you go. Wilson Hayes, next guy lined up for your title defense. I believe that would be your 9th title defense since winning the flyweight title back in 2012. What do you think of him as an opponent compared to the kind of guys you've been fighting recently?
Yeah, Wilson Hayes is a great opponent. Just another opponent, like, Henry Cejudo and Joseph and Dotson. They're just another opponent. I would say he's been in the game a lot longer than my other opponents. He also has a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and that's about it. All
right. Well, we're looking forward to the fight. Can you give us any notion of a prediction on it before we go?
Never give predictions, my friend. Never give predictions since I was amateur.
Smart man.
It won't change.
Impossible to let anyone down if you don't give a prediction, right?
Yep, exactly.
All right. Well,
and it doesn't let me down either. A lot of people are
That's right.
Like, I'm going to finish you guy in the first fucking round. Actually, nope, we're in the 3rd round, bro. Hope you predicted this.
Look at Luke Rockhold. He made that prediction against Michael Bisping, didn't he?
Shit, I predicted it too. I thought Luke Rockhold was going to slaughter his ass.
I think we all did.
Things happen, and I tell fighters now, like, if you don't respect your opponent, at least respect your paycheck, because when you lose, your next paycheck isn't going to be as nice as the one would have been if you would have won. So it's unfortunate. I'm sure Luke Rockhold will be back. I got all but that love for Luke Rockhold. I actually really like him. So we'll see what happens.
Well, we look forward to keep seeing you continuing to fight and continuing to collect, hopefully, bigger and bigger paychecks. Thank you, Demetrious, so much for joining us today to talk to us, and we are very much looking forward to your next fight with Wilson Hayes.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
All right, that's it for Demetrious. We will return shortly with the results and implications of UFC Ottawa, especially the main event contest between Rory MacDonald and Stephen Thompson. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. All right, so after interviewing and having a fascinating, enlightening conversation with one of the most tactical fighters in the sport in Demetrious Johnson, and thank you to Demetrious for that once again, now, Pat, we move on to discussing a fight between two of the most tactical fighters in the welterweight division, those being Stephen Thompson and Rory MacDonald. Both of us had a lot of... were you nervous watching this fight?
Watching Thompson MacDonald,
Yeah.
I was a little nervous for it. I just kept expecting an explosion that never really happened.
Sure, yeah. The disappointment was that it didn't explode beyond that, because one of my favorite fights of recent memory is Andy Lee versus Peter Quillen boxing match, and it was similar to this fight, but it had those moments where it was a very tense, nerve-wracking battle for the control of distance and for creating setups and for all of these different strategies to attack across this weird long distance. But there were 5 knockdowns because suddenly someone would get clipped and it would become exciting, and then it would go back to being this tense, low simmer. This one never really got past the simmer, unfortunately, not until the 5th round. And I think that kind of ties into the way that we want to discuss it today. I have an article coming out same day as this episode, looking at a lot of the tactical areas that were really impressive about this fight, especially from Stephen Thompson's part. And talking about how Stephen Thompson did a great job of neutralizing Rory MacDonald. Today, I'd kind of like us to take the opposite tack. I would like to talk about the strategy of the fight, how it played out from round to round and as a whole, and what Rory MacDonald did not succeed in doing that caused him to lose a fairly lopsided decision.
Yeah, so first and foremost, I think that MacDonald rose and fell in this fight with the jab. That when he was jabbing, when he was gauging the distance and probing Thompson's defenses and setting his preferred range, I don't think it's a coincidence that was when MacDonald had a lot more success. When he tried to come in behind the right hand only, when he neglected the jab, when he did a lot of missing, and he did a lot of coming up short before he even actually got around to throwing the strike.
Yes.
And I think there was a really telling moment. I think it was between the first and the second round where Zahabi said 1-inch punches don't give him anything to counter, something to that effect.
He said don't give him anything to counter. Really cautious. That was what stood out to me too.
Yeah, and I don't think that you can fight Stephen Thompson that way and win a fight.
Yeah,
I don't think you can hope to beat him if that's your strategy.
You obviously don't want to go. You don't want to go the Johnny Hendricks route and be leaping across open space, or like Patrick Cote and get knocked down jumping in, but you certainly don't want to be laying back and being so cautious of being tagged that you don't connect. And really, the crazy thing is that because I think MacDonald didn't have that jab and that distance management, wasn't using it to take these small steps and close the distance and create openings as the first half of the fight played out, that actually led to him leaping across open space with lead right hands and these awkward stance shifts in the later rounds in the fight, and he got badly hurt in the 5th round trying to do that kind of stuff. The movement of... He seemed oddly committed to this shift step into the pocket behind a right hook. He did a lot of really interesting... Some of it was really interesting and really effective. Cross-armed guard stuff, like Henry Armstrong style, trying to cover with both arms across his face while he came in low. I kind of liked that. But the problem is that it's a very big movement. And you don't have a corner you can trap somebody in like Henry Armstrong always did as a boxer in the octagon. And Stephen Thompson moves very well, and he's got a really good sense of the distance. And so the difference between sticking a jab in his face and taking 2-3-inch steps towards him in the process is much harder for a guy like Stephen Thompson to read than shifting and covering 3 feet all at once with a big punch coming with that movement. It's like a karate-style lunge punch almost, and there's a reason that they don't even use those in karate competitions, because you can see it coming. In a fight, speed matters, and you just can't disguise that kind of stuff very easily.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think there are two aspects to this. There are two things that not throwing the jab did for MacDonald. So first of all, I think you're absolutely right that it led to him lunging in more in the later rounds and being more open, being countered. The thing that I don't understand here is MacDonald is a master of the jab. He has, I think, probably the best all-around jab in mixed martial arts.
Against southpaws, too. That's the weird thing. He's done it against southpaws before. He put on a jab clinic for many of the rounds against Robbie Lawler.
Yeah, there was a GIF. I don't know if you saw this, Connor, in the article that I wrote last week of the Washington Post, for the Washington Post, that had MacDonald lacing Lawler with a right hand. Lawler tries to counter it. MacDonald takes a half step back and then snaps Lawler's head back with a beautiful jab to reestablish his distance. Like, he knows how to jab southpaws.
Yeah.
And furthermore, MacDonald knows how to vary the timing and the rhythm of his jab. If you're worried about getting countered, and I think that was the big fear, that if they threw the jab out there too much, that Thompson was going to just counter him over and over again. The answer to that isn't stop jabbing; it's vary the timing and the rhythm of your jab.
Yeah, and the other big thing that I think was missing that kind of ties into that is feinting. Is for some reason, because that jab was missing, because I guess they were worried about extending that and overcommitting to it. And, I mean, there's definitely good reason to fear overcommitting against Stephen Thompson. As that fight wore on, you definitely saw how comfortable he was either taking a small step back with his back foot without moving his front foot. That's something that, like, Brendan Ingle fighters used to do really well. Like, Nassim Hamed, not so much. But Harold Graham did that really, really well, where he would slide back with his back foot but keep his front foot in place. So he's still close to you, but his head moves further away. And then he can still just lean right back over where his front foot is and drive a punch through your chin. He does that kind of stuff very well. He did it to MacDonald as the fight went on. But the solution to that is not to not jab. The solution, as you said, is to jab and then follow up by moving forward after he pulls back, or to feint the jab to get him to bite on something that isn't happening, and then you can either hit him because he has reacted, or you can get him to stop reacting because he's going to start thinking that the jab is just a feint. You need to play off of the jab. You can't just think about landing it and then say to yourself, well, if I can't land it, I'm not going to throw it.
Yeah, also jab to the body. Jab to the sternum, jab to the solar plexus. Vary the location of your jab, vary the angle of your jab. So sometimes you're jabbing from a high guard, sometimes you're throwing up jabs. But the answer to none of this is just not to jab. Also, after throwing that right hand, throw the jab sometimes. These were all things. The puzzling thing about this to me is these are all things that we have seen. That we have seen MacDonald do before, and none of them were present. Yeah. So the second bit of that, not just that the jab wasn't present, it was that normally MacDonald is very good at capitalizing on opportunities when he gets them.
Yeah.
In this fight, there were times when he backed Thompson all the way up to the fence and then just let him off the hook, just did not pull the trigger and let a flurry go. And you cannot beat Stephen Thompson if, when you back him up to the fence, when you create an opportunity to do actual serious damage, you then don't capitalize. Because he's not going to give you many opportunities.
Yeah.
When you've got him in front of you, then you need to flurry, then you need to land. And that, I think, is what makes the prospect of a Thompson-Lawler title fight so compelling, is a guy who doesn't give you many opportunities versus a guy who is better at exploiting opportunities as he gets them than just about anybody else.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's... I don't want to tell Firas as a hobby how to do his job. Anyone who's listened to the show before knows that you and I both have an immense amount of respect for what Firas does, and that we're both big fans of Rory. And part of this is confusion stemming from the fact that we have seen Rory do a lot of the things we expected him to do in this fight. Because there were, I think, for the entirety of the fight, it felt like it was still a winnable matchup for Rory MacDonald. Even when the first two rounds were gone and he had probably lost both of them, although I thought the first round was, I probably would have called that a draw if I was a judge. Even though he had not done a lot to seize those, when he started to actually create some counters and move forward and his distance was a little shorter, I thought, okay, this is going to continue to build and he's going to win this fight. And then the jab kind of vanished. It just became very weird. So to me, there's all of that, all of these little tactical adjustments that I would have liked to have seen Rory make. To me, I think the biggest one, this is were I in Firas Zahabi's shoes, and thank God I'm not, because Rory MacDonald would have lost even worse, but were I in Firas Zahabi's shoes, were I coaching a fighter against a matchup like Stephen Thompson, I think the biggest thing I would want to exploit is the fact that Stephen Thompson's style at a pace is not really maintainable for 5 rounds straight. I don't think it is. We have seen him fade in the third rounds of several fights when he's gone to decision. We saw him slow down pretty considerably against Patrick Cote. We saw him slow down really, really badly when he fought Matt Brown. Now, obviously, his wrestling is a lot better than it was then and everything, but we also saw him slow down badly in the Deshaun Burrell fight shortly after that. he has had a lot of fights where he's gotten kind of sloppy and loose as the fight goes on because he bounces on his toes a lot. He fights out of a very demanding, low, long stance, that kind of horse stance, I guess you might call it, and throws a lot of lunging strikes and demanding kicks. And we talked about that when we recapped Aljamain Sterling's loss to Brian Caraway. The kicks are extremely demanding. And so, to me, I think even without those tactical adjustments, Rory MacDonald still could have enhanced his chances of winning this fight if he had just put more pressure on from the beginning. He doesn't have to go in wild, but he has to push Thompson around. He has to make him worry about what's coming his way, and he has to make him move. Because Rory MacDonald is very efficient and very economical with the way he moves around the ring. I think he can probably move around for 10 rounds straight with his style a lot more effectively than Stephen Thompson can, even without a ton of strikes being thrown.
Yeah, because as this fight went, with regard to the pace, there was no reason why Thompson couldn't do that for 5 rounds.
Absolutely. And in fact, he was because he hadn't been pressured earlier in the fight, he was actually able to pull the trigger a lot in the 5th round when Rory finally did start coming forward. So he held off on the pressure so long that by the time he applied it, Thompson was perfectly capable of dealing with it.
Yeah, because you look at the 4th and the 5th round in this fight, and Thompson threw 72 strikes in the 4th round, and he threw 78 in the 5th.
Right.
Those were by almost double what he threw in the 2nd and 3rd.
And he couldn't do that for 5 rounds straight. I don't think so.
No. So I think because I think you're absolutely right. He only threw 20 strikes in the 1st round, but he didn't really have to throw a lot because MacDonald only threw 13.
Yeah.
A
lot of those were throwaway strikes too. A lot of them were just kind of maintaining distance and just touching MacDonald because MacDonald was not putting any kind of physical or mental pressure on him.
Yeah. So this is again not to be too hard on the crew at TriStar who've done very, very good work over the years with Rory MacDonald and what have you. But I think it's also entirely possible that there are variables that we're not aware of that went into crafting a game plan like this. I think first and foremost, the strong possibility that MacDonald's face just couldn't take much damage and much punishment after what Robbie Lawler put him through.
Sure.
MacDonald talked about how his nose had been broken multiple times in the camp leading up to this. And you noticed that as soon as Thompson started putting actual leather on him later in the fight, he was in trouble.
He almost had a 5th round Lawler moment where he shelled up rather than going down. And he mentioned that it was a better reaction, but it's definitely, you have to wonder if there are still physical and possibly mental scars lingering from that Lawler fight. Even a guy as crazy tough and as crazy as Rory MacDonald, you can't ignore the possibility that kind of war takes a toll.
Well, and even just in the physical sense that the goal had to be do not get punched in the face because you take your chances of putting Thompson in a position where you can make something happen to win the fight.
Yeah.
Even playing as conservatively as this, maybe at some point you do manage to get a flurry off and you hurt him, or you manage to get him into a position where you can work a takedown, you get on top and you brutalize him. Or you hit an Imanari roll into a leg lock.
Great first, no complaints about that, by the way. Great first move of the fight. I was very excited to see that.
So it's entirely possible that there is that Zahabi and the TriStar guys were playing with that variable in ways that were not immediately obvious.
Trying to plan for the fact that he actually couldn't afford to get countered by one of those straight punches.
Exactly. Yeah. So and then the flip side to that also is knowing that maybe they went into this fight thinking that it's better to lose even kind of a lopsided decision and not have that kind of devastating loss, knowing that this is MacDonald's last fight before free agency, that it's a lot easier to sell Rory MacDonald to Bellator saying, oh, well, it was a bad fight. His face was all fucked up. He had to get his nose reconstructed afterwards. And he still was competitive with the number 1 contender, as opposed to, he got his whole shit wrecked.
Sure. It's better than him rushing in and saying, I can't do 5 rounds and risk taking damage and then just getting knocked out in the first.
Yeah. So these are all. It's entirely possible. We don't know this. It's entirely possible that these were necessary variables that we're just not aware of and can't be aware of.
Some of it, though, I still don't quite understand the fact that given a 5-round fight, that Rory had a lot of trouble doing things that I think you and I both thought were fairly essential. He had to be competitive in that long range before he could press the close range, and he turned this into I think probably inexplicably, because he did have success when he threw them, he turned it into the kind of matchup that Stephen Thompson thrives on, which is a boxer versus kickboxer matchup. Rory MacDonald totally conceded the kicking range. Not totally, because like I said, he threw him a few times. He landed almost every time he threw a kick to the body. I thought if he'd let loose with more of his front kicks and round kicks, they've been very effective tools for him in the past, that really could have changed the tone of this fight. Because at the very least, Stephen Thompson, that would have put some mental pressure on him. He would have known, I cannot just keep taking these kicks to the open torso. I can't just keep taking these kicks to the leg. I've got to make something happen.
So I'm looking at the fight metric numbers, and I think they tell a lot. I think they tell a very distinct story of this fight and what went right and what went wrong. Rory MacDonald threw one strike at Stephen Thompson's legs. One strike in 5 rounds. He only threw 14 strikes to Thompson's body.
Yeah.
Like, that is, I don't understand how you watch this fight and how you don't immediately go and watch Nikki Holtzkin versus Raymond Daniels and think, okay, this is how you beat a guy who wants to do the things that Stephen Thompson
You got to
wants.
slow him down. You have to make him start sucking wind and then hit him while he's breathing in. You got to do something like that. And you've got to compete at his range. You've got to, even if you're going to take some licks, you have got to own 50% of that range as best you can.
Yeah, it's just it's a little frustrating. And again, even the variables that I mentioned that are, again, possibilities we're not necessarily aware of. Even that doesn't explain the failure to pull the trigger when he did have his chances. When he did get Thompson backed up, the flurry was there and he just didn't throw.
Yeah, just a little overcautious, which at times I think has been a worthy critique of Firas Zahabi's fighters. There are a few things I think we could acknowledge that Firas Zahabi and the TriStar team don't necessarily instill in their fighters. A, he's not Rafael Cordero. We don't have a lot of aggressive pressure fighters who pull the trigger on every opportunity at that camp. B, we don't have a lot of great head movement. I think for Rory, that's probably even worse. You could see very clearly how stiff he was in the upper body and in the hips compared to Stephen Thompson. He had a lot more trouble pulling and creating distance without having to move his feet. Those are things that I don't think are necessarily well taught at that gym, or are not a focus in the way that like the totality of an MMA game is. But it was still a little strange to see. And again, this is our focus on today's episode. Have you written anything on Stephen Thompson yet since the fight?
No, and I don't think I'm going to.
Okay, well, I will.
Oh, wait, no, I did. Jesus, I completely forgot about this. I wrote a piece about how he matches up with Robbie Lawler.
Okay, great. So we have both, by the time you're listening to this, done some celebrating of Stephen Thompson. We wanted to look at Rory MacDonald and why we think he struggled and try to get at the reasons that he had a tough time, but all due credit to Stephen Thompson. He did an absolutely beautiful job of capitalizing on what he had in front of him, which is all any fighter can ask for, is to have a problem in front of you and solve it. And he solved it beautifully. It's
crazy how good he looked as an in-fighter in this.
Yeah.
Like how good he was at not letting MacDonald dominate in the clinch. And so he did a great job of landing knees and short punches on the inside and then immediately breaking off.
Yeah, absolutely. He pushed MacDonald.
He probably won the clinch exchanges.
He pushed MacDonald against. I think MacDonald probably landed the hardest shot of the first clinch exchange, but then he pushed Rory against the fence and held him there for like a minute. That's probably not an easy thing for a guy like Rory MacDonald to accept. And I think you have to give credit to Stephen Thompson for that, for being as smooth as he is at range and still adding wrinkles to his game. He's 33 years old, and he is still actually improving as a mixed martial artist in marked ways. So check out Pat's article if you want to see what Stephen Wonderboy's Thompson's prospects are. Check out my article if you want to get a more like a technical breakdown of what he did to capitalize on what Rory was giving him and why he actually, I think, made it kind of difficult for Rory to do the things we wanted him to do. Not all of that is on Rory. Some of that has to do with Wonderboy's brilliant technical striking. But I think that basically sums up our look at this matchup. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about 3 of the other fights from this card that piqued our interest. You can probably guess which ones they are. No, unfortunately, we're not talking about Steve Bosse versus Sean O'Connell, even though it was incredible. We're going to be talking about Donald Cerrone versus Patrick Cote. We're going to talk about Joanne Calderwood versus Valerie Letourneau, and give it a little shine to our friend, the middleweight contender, Kristof Jotko, who obliterated Tandon McCrory in a way that, though Pat and I both picked him, neither of us expected. All of that after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. And we are back. As promised, Donald Cerrone defeats Patrick Cote. Pat, you were just commenting on the fact that Donald Cerrone knocked Patrick Cote down 3 times with punches, no mind. The only other times we could think of that he has actually knocked someone down with punches were a kind of freak jab knockdown in the Edson Barboza fight, and then a knockdown after head kicking the daylights out of Melvin Gillard. And there are really no other punch knockdowns on Cerrone's record in recent memory.
Yeah, I really think you would have to go all the way back to the Rob McCullough fight back in 2008 to find more punch knockdowns from Cerrone. It's entirely possible we're forgetting some here.
It is, but what that to me speaks to the remarkable transformation that Donald Cerrone had in this fight. And you pointed out to me that this was the first fight that Brandon Gibson had run the entire camp for Cerrone as his head striking coach.
Correct. I think as his head coach, period.
I think that is a huge feather in Brandon Gibson's cap, because I think all of us in the MMA world acknowledge that this was a potentially very dangerous matchup for Cerrone against someone who we assumed, should he get into boxing range, would have a strong advantage. And then Donald Cerrone, who has, as we just noted because of the punch knockdowns, has never shown an aptitude for combinations in the pocket and for really countering effectively in that range at all. He dominated the area of the fight that I think most of us expected to be his biggest weakness.
Yeah, it's hard to overstate. Like this is not to say that Cerrone was flawless. I think he's still not the most defensively sound fighter. He doesn't move his head very much. There are still flaws in Cerrone's game, right? Like I don't think that any of us want to claim that he's suddenly become a perfect fighter.
No.
But I don't think that any of us thought that he was going to make these kinds of improvements at this stage in his career with this much experience under his belt.
Yeah.
And these are I want to reemphasize, these are substantial changes in his game. His punching mechanics looked better, his footwork was tighter, he was much better at putting together combinations and sensing and timing his combinations. He mixed up the rhythm on the left hook. The left hook was his money punch here, and I think 2 or maybe even all 3 of the knockdowns were off the left hook. I know that 2 were. I can't remember what the third one was.
I kind of think all 3 were.
So it wasn't just that he was out there winging left hooks like crazy. His left hook was technical. It was tight. He got great weight transfer into it. It was a really fundamentally sound punch, much better than his left hook has ever looked before. Mm-hmm. But he varied the rhythm of it. On one of those knockdowns, he waited a half beat before throwing it.
Which that is something that Cerrone's always been able to do. He's done that with his switch kick for ages, where he will kind of drag with the switch kick and delay it so that you bring your hands down and you miss the kick as it comes up at your head.
That's what he did to Dennis Seaver.
Yeah, absolutely. He did that very famously to Dennis Seaver in one of those goofy baby giraffe type knockdowns. But he's never been able to apply that to his punching. I think both you and I think that probably Mike Winklejohn's strong suit is not necessarily his boxing training. And we think it's one of the major improvements that Brandon Gibson seems to have made. And we heard him talk about that kind of stuff when he came on the show time before last, about his focus on trying to create basically all-terrain fighters who can compete in all phases and all ranges. And for a long time, that has been the one phase or the one range in which Donald Cerrone has not just not been great, but actually suffered. When guys have gotten to that range, guys like Eddie Alvarez, guys like Rafael dos Anjos, like Anthony Pettis, like Edson Barboza before he became hurt, when guys have penetrated that long range and avoided the clinch, they have been able to hurt Donald and take advantage of his defense in ways that Patrick Cote was not able to do because he was being countered every time he tried. And then it turned out that Cote had the worst defensive instincts for the situation because he kept being forced to retreat, standing tall, leaning back out of his stance, and getting clipped on the chin as he was in bad position.
Yeah, Cerrone did a great job of closing the door on his combinations.
Absolutely.
And I think that Cote, with good reason, going into this fight, really expected to see really expected Cerrone to basically quit after the straight right, or to follow the straight right with a left kick. Yeah. And so I think a lot of the time you saw Cote's hands in position to defend a left kick after the straight right.
Yeah.
And that's what made it so brilliant, is the left hook just came right over the top.
And he mixed the two. Time. He did actually throw the left kicks and the body kicks, and he was alternating really, really well at range between kicks and punches, in a way that he hasn't before. In the past, Cerrone has been like the kickboxer's version of an old school wrestle boxer, where he just kind of flings some hands in your face and then dive for a takedown. Well, for Cerrone, he'll fling some hands in your face and try to hit you with a knee or a kick. And this was the first time I could think of where his hands were a serious, serious threat on their own.
Yeah, he really looked fantastic. Did it seem to you, like, I think his stance was a little bit different in this fight? I think he was a little lower, a little more hunched down than he usually is. Not quite as not standing quite as tall.
Maybe. Yeah, I didn't really catch on to that, but maybe. I'll have to look at it again.
He seemed a little more rooted, but in good ways. And I think that's where he was better able to sit down and throw with real power when he wanted to.
Yeah.
I would need to look at it again. Like, this is a rare time where I don't have this fight playing in the background as we're discussing it. But it really seemed to me like there were real substantial changes to his game that benefited him. So shouts to Brandon Gibson, shouts to Donald Cerrone. I think that combination is going to do some really good things. Also, Cerrone looked bigger in this fight. He looked like an actual welterweight. It looked to me like he'd probably put on 5 or 7 pounds of muscle.
I think he's been headed that direction for a little while. That is probably the reason he decided to go to welterweight, because he used to not have trouble with cuts at all, and then still maintaining the kind of schedule that he used to maintain when he was smaller. Because I think we can probably attribute a lot of the knockouts Donald Cerrone has gotten the past 2 years to kind of physical maturation. Adding power, adding muscle mass, just being kind of a bigger, stronger guy. Also, you can be putting on, building your muscles for a long time as an athlete before your tendons and ligaments catch up. Those things take a lot longer to strengthen. And I have a weird notion that having strong, snappy tendons is often what makes a puncher really effective. And I think, getting to the age where he's now an older fighter and more experienced, he's also kind of getting a bit of old man strength, as you might say. Because Donald Cerrone was not a knockout artist earlier in his career. He was a guy who would sometimes knock you down, but mostly you would take him down and he would submit you after he beat you up on the feet a little bit. In recent years, we've got the knockout of Melvin Guillard, we've got the knockout of Adriano Martins, the knockdown and subsequent submission of Edson Barboza. He KO'd Jim Miller after body kicking him into oblivion. Did the same to John McDessie. Now he just knocked out the iron-chinned Patrick Cote. I think we have to give credit to the fact that Donald Cerrone is actually becoming a seriously dangerous kickboxer in a way that he never was before.
Yeah. Also, shouts to speaking of physical maturation. He did not look when he and Cerrone did briefly get into the clinch. Cerrone did not look overpowered at all. Right. He actually looked like the stronger guy in those scenarios, which is nuts.
Yeah, absolutely not nuts. Something I expected. Not something I expected at all.
Yeah. So again, shouts. This was fantastic.
Who thought Patrick Cote's best range would be low kicking range with Donald Cerrone? That was not something any of us would have ever predicted going into this matchup.
No, I mean, it's great to see a guy like Donald Cerrone, who has, I think, 38 fights under his belt, still making improvements, still getting better, still finding new wrinkles to his game. It's nice to see that. If you don't like Donald Cerrone, I don't understand why you're watching MMA. If you can't root for him a little bit, having seen him compete in the UFC 20 times, plus God knows how many fights in the WEC before that, this is a dude who deserves to be rooted for.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of someone who you were rooting for going into this matchup, Joanne Calderwood defeated Valerie Letourneau. I say defeated, she kind of destroyed her. A very, very lopsided matchup. Letourneau had a ton of trouble with Calderwood. I think you were hoping basically to see some improvements from Calderwood's time at TriStar. You were hoping to see that start to pay off in a way that it hadn't previously. And I basically went into it with a bit of a conservative pick and said, I haven't seen it yet, and so I think the Calderwood that shows up to fight Courtney Casey loses to Valerie Letourneau. I think more or less the same Valerie Letourneau showed up. She didn't actually throw more volume in the way that I wanted her to, going up to flyweight, but part of that is because Joanne Calderwood was just mollywopping her for 3 rounds straight. She did a beautiful job of setting up her strikes and still using that crazy, unpredictable variety that she's been known for.
Yeah, so I mean, I thought Letourneau threw a fair bit of volume. She was throwing at a fairly good clip whenever her back wasn't on the mat, but she couldn't keep up with Calderwood, who was working at an insane pace. Like
Sure.
this was everything I was hoping for from Calderwood, and this was more or less what I thought would happen. She kept up the volume. She looked like a more powerful kicker.
Sure.
In this fight.
Yeah.
Like she looks like, without the cut down to 115 pounds, she looks like she can commit a little bit more to her strikes.
Front kicks to the body were atrocious.
Yeah. Oh my God. There's like, if you've never been front kicked in the body like that, it's hard to overstate how unpleasant it is when the ball of the foot comes and digs right up under your ribs, like right under your sternum. Like it really, really, really fucking hurts.
Getting uppercut to the pit of the stomach hurts. Getting kneed hurts. I think a front kick, well placed and well timed, can hurt more than any of those because the lever is so much longer. You can put so much. By unfolding the leg, you can snap, but you can throw your hip straight through it the way you would with the knee. So you get these like both kinds of force combining. It's such a penetrative strike. She kicked Letourneau so hard her shirt flew off. In fact, that was how powerful those kicks were.
Enough to cause a wardrobe malfunction.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is saying something. No, I mean, like this. I thought Calderwood looked great. Loved the volume. Loved the increasing power. Loved the. I think she looked good strategically in this fight. Like it looked like she had a plan. She knew what she wanted to do, and she didn't panic when Letourneau was having some success. She just stuck to what she was trying to get.
I also thought her mechanics at range looked a lot better because I really thought she was going to have trouble avoiding the punches of Letourneau, especially while coming in. That's been a thing with Calderwood in the past. She's very upright, and she was still fairly upright. She maybe had a bit more spring in the knees this time. But she used to do kind of the old school Donald Cerrone thing where she would literally just walk after her opponent. She had basically wanton stance switching happening at all times. And that was not the case in this fight. She was still comfortable fighting out of both stances, but she did a lot of much more technical sliding with her footwork, where she would come in behind a feint or behind a jab, and she would land, and she'd take a little step off to the side and then slide off on a slightly different angle from the one she came in on, in the same stance she came in on. And so even when she did get hit, she wasn't nearly as easy to hurt.
She was much less hittable in this fight than she has been in the past.
And I think it was all footwork.
Yeah, she's still hittable. Like I want to make that real clear. Like I don't think Joanne Calderwood is ever going to be like some sort of defensive genius fighter. Like I don't think she has that in her to do that.
But she could be a lot like Donald Cerrone. Like adding footwork goes a huge way to making up for the deficiencies of such an upright style.
Yeah, absolutely. Just not being there. To be hit, like because it's a given when you track down a fighter like that, when you can pin them in place, like Nate Diaz did to Cerrone years and years ago, and as has happened to Calderwood on a couple of occasions, like you're hittable in that scenario because you really rely a lot on your guard and you really rely a lot on your distance to avoid shots. But the way you get around that is just by being in those positions less. Yeah. That's the solution there. Yeah,
I thought she did so very intelligently. I think that is absolutely. I believe, because I don't know for certain, but that seems like a kind of TriStar advancement on her part. Something that she probably picked up under Faraz. That's the kind of footwork that Rory MacDonald has. That's very good. It's the kind of footwork that GSP had, that John McDessie has, that Nordine Taleb has. That very technical, measured, efficient footwork, and that'll go a long way towards making her a much safer, violent action fighter.
Yeah, it's really precise. Yeah. in the way that they teach it, especially because I think one of the uniting things about a lot of the fighters at TriStar is that they're not athletic freaks. Like we think a lot about guys like GSP as the quintessential TriStar fighter. I actually don't think that Rory MacDonald is like that overpowering an athlete. Like he's not that fast. By those standards, I don't think Joanne Calderwood is that fast. I don't think Nordine Taleb is really that fast. No. They're strong and they're well conditioned.
Strong and well conditioned is exactly what I was going to say. They are fighters. They're basically very well prepared in every aspect.
Yeah, you know that they're guys who have maximized their athleticism because they're all on great strength and conditioning programs and they put the time in.
And maybe maybe it's actually that Faraz doesn't exactly know how to get the best out of some less cerebral but extremely athletically gifted fighters, because that's the case with Alex Garcia.
Yeah, shouts to Alex Garcia.
A lot of shouts. That's the least flattering shout of the episode, but he's had a lot of trouble like becoming a TriStar fighter, really, like fitting that mold, because he's just a very different type of guy from Taleb and MacDonald, guys who are big and strong and they don't get tired. But really, I think that's because Faraz and his team are really smart about preparing their fighters, and not so much because they're athletic freaks.
Yeah, true. And I mean, I think when you get both of those things together in guys like, I think Tom Breeze. Like, I think
Sure.
Breeze is both really smart and really cerebral, but also really, really athletically gifted. I think that I don't think you can be one of Zahabi's fighters without being cerebral. We've talked about this before in terms of the coach fighter pairings and why they sometimes work and why they sometimes don't. And no offense to Randa Marcos, but if what she took from what Zahabi and those guys were teaching her was that they were trying to make her into too patient of a fighter,
is that what she said?
She said after that fight that they were trying to change her style and they were trying to make her too patient, and that's why she left. But if that's what you took from that, I don't think that's the right fit for you.
Yeah, it doesn't indicate necessarily that you're wrong for what's best for you, but it does indicate that is. I mean, in that sense, it's probably actually a good move for her, and she won her fight, a fight we didn't think she'd win.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you can understand that that's not the right fit for you, that's fine. I still think that in the long run, Marcos would be a better fighter by staying there. But if you really understand that there is a fundamental issue between you and your coaches, that you are just not in the right in the same headspace, absolutely leave.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah,
I just realized, by the way, that you said he's very cerebral, but also very athletic. Tom Breeze is like Birmingham's version of a valedictorian douche, so I can't like him anymore.
What? How so?
You just can't be. You can't have the best of both worlds, Pat. You can't be like a tall, muscular, good-looking guy. You can't be the football star quarterback and be the guy who gets straight A's in a 4.0. It's just too advantaged. So I'm no longer a Tom Breeze fan.
Oh, but he actually is a nice guy, though. I like Tom Breeze.
I know he is.
I know he is. So you're pissed that he seems to have everything. Yeah. Okay, that's fair. I see where you're coming from, Connor. This puts your enjoyment of journeyman middleweights in
they're relatable, damn it. Roy Nelson's a fighter like me.
Jesus Christ. Oh, you remember when Roy Nelson called Daniel Cormier and Uncle Tom, speaking of terrible things that have happened?
That is definitely why I relate to Roy Nelson. I, too, am a sickening racist. So,
Jesus. Okay, Christ. Let's talk about Kristof Jotko.
Yeah, right. Speaking of middleweights, holy shit, Kristof Jotko. We both thought he'd beat Tandem McCrory. We thought he would do it by kind of being that TriStar style fighter, by just kind of being this slightly weird bag of tricks who operates from long range and knows how to be cautious. I thought really he would refuse McCrory the range at which he's actually best and force him to fight in long range. That's exactly what he did, except when McCrory made his first attempt to try to create the range he likes, he got caught with a huge counter left and knocked out cold. Not something I expected from Kristof, I gotta be honest.
Yeah, I've been banging the Kristof Jotko is actually a good fighter drum for quite a while now. But this was a brilliant performance, and not just because of the knockout, the way he was moving before that. It's not just that knockout happened; it's that he repeatedly put himself in position to land shots like that.
Yeah.
Because of his command of the outside angle.
It's difficult to draw a lot. We've said this in the past. It's difficult to draw a lot from a quick knockout, but there was nothing in this performance that really made that KO surprising, other than the fact that Jotko is not known for knockout power. Everything else about the performance, you can clearly see how it worked towards setting that punch up.
Yeah, this looked like a better Kristof Jotko fight, but a better Kristof Jotko fight. And the fact that he got the knockout, while that was surprising, the underlying things that led to it were not.
And that's been his pattern for the last 2 or 3 fights. He has been getting slightly better in notable ways. He was better with his footwork and his counters against Brad Scott, and he took that to another level now against Tandem McCrory. And I think, too, a thing that I think I enjoy celebrating, because I don't get to talk about it often, but it's a tactic that I really enjoy, is when short fighters use long fighters' length against them. And the way that typically is done, and the conventional wisdom is that short fighters have to get inside. They have to get into the pocket. They have to get past the reach of those long arms so that their short limbs can be more effective. But another very reliable strategy that guys who are light on their feet and have a good sense of range and good timing are able to utilize is that you can just stay too far away for the long guy to hit you and make him overextend, because it takes a lot longer to retract those long limbs once you're overextended, and then the short guy can just take a small step forward and clock you. And it's exactly what Jotko did to McCrory. It's what Faber did when he fought Michael MacDonald. It's what one of my favorite boxers, Miguel Canto, used to do all the time. Very short, but very effective from the outside. I like to see that.
It's how Chad Mendes had the most success when he was fighting Conor McGregor, too, for that matter.
Yeah, draw him in and then clock him when he comes in tall with his arm stretched out. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. So Kristof Jotko looking good. You pointed this out before we started recording again, Connor. The actual quality of Jotko's winning streak.
Yeah.
In the middleweight division. So leaving aside Thor Trang, as you pointed out, since the loss to Magnus Siedenblad a few years ago, he's beaten Thor Trang, beat the crap out of Thor Trang.
Yeah.
Then took a fight that was not actually that close against Scott Askham.
Yeah, shouldn't have been a split.
October. Yeah, and then beat Brad Scott, a tough, durable journeyman.
Fairly close fight, but he showed some improvements, did a good job.
And now he's knocked out a resurgent Tamden McCrory. Yeah. So I think you give Jotko somebody ranks between 10 and 15. Sure. And I think that he could surprise in that kind of fight.
Sure. Give him the loser of Musashi Santos or something. He could fight something like that. Absolutely. Yeah. Or the winner. Absolutely. Why the fuck not? I think Kristof Jotko. I think Kristof Jotko could probably actually do okay in a fight with Gegard Mousasi. I think that's actually not an unwinnable fight for him.
No, absolutely not. So I think it's important to highlight performances like this from guys like Jotko have gotten lost in the UFC's roster expansion. They're these talented dudes who are winning fights, but they're winning fights like Jotko fought on the undercard of the Paddy Houlihan versus Louis Smolka card in Dublin. Yeah. Before that, he fought on the Nelson Story card that was on Fight Pass. Actually, this was the first time since his UFC debut that he's fought on a card that didn't air on Fight Pass.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. They're guys like who's the guy I'm thinking of? Like Mishinori Tanaka. Like good, talented young fighters that no one has any reason to actually know about because it's just and I like having fight events. I like having a lot of fighters to look at, but it's a trade-off because you lose the promotion of guys like this who genuinely deserve to be celebrated as good young fighters. So I think it's worth just shouts out to Kristof Jotko, as we've been saying this episode. Shouts to Kristof Jotko. It's good to celebrate guys like in his position.
Yeah, well, it's something that we can do because we watch so many of these fights.
Right.
I think that when like you and I, Connor, you are forced to watch literally every UFC fight at some point, even if not live.
Yep.
I think it puts us in a position to highlight some of these guys who maybe deserve a little more attention. Or like Tom Breeze, too. Tom Breeze was another guy prior to his last fight that I think a lot of people had not heard of, who was, again, the kind of fighter to start getting excited about. And Jotko is now at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. I fully agree. So it was a wonderful layout of fights. And speaking of that, Pat, holy goddamn hell, we have a lineup of fights coming up. In 2 weeks, it's UFC Fight Week. And there are 3 absolutely stacked events taking place that weekend. And we have, for you guys listening at home, a schedule laid out for those events. We will be doing 3 episodes in the 2 weeks leading up to UFC 200. We will be doing an episode on Wednesday, June 29th. That's the week before UFC Fight Week. And then we'll be doing 2 episodes the next week, one on July 5th and one on July 6th. For those shows, so you can start getting excited about it, July 29th, we will be talking about Rafael dos Anjos versus Eddie Alvarez for the lightweight title, Joe Duffy versus Mitch Clark, Anthony Birchak versus Danilo Lopez, and the return of Brock Lesnar versus Mark Hunt. Then, July 5th, we'll be talking about Joanna Jędrzejczyk versus Claudia Gadelha for the women's strawweight title. We'll be talking about Will Brooks versus Ross Pearson, the UFC debut of Will Brooks, one of the best lightweights on the planet. We'll be talking about Doo-Ho Choi, the Korean Superboy, versus Thiago Tavares, and we'll be talking about the rematch for the interim featherweight title, laughable as that is, between Jose Aldo and Frankie Edgar. July 6th, Wednesday of UFC Fight Week, we're going to talk about Daniel Cormier versus Jon Jones for the unified UFC light heavyweight title. We'll talk about Miesha Tate versus Amanda Nunes for the women's bantamweight title. We'll talk about TJ Dillashaw versus Rafael Assunção, Johnny Hendricks versus Kelvin Gastelum, and Gegard Mousasi versus Thiago Santos. We have a hell of a schedule, and we even had to winnow that list down to the fights that we really had to talk about because there are so many good matchups coming that if these were isolated to separate weeks, we would talking about probably twice as many fights, but there's just too much good stuff to cover. But we are really looking forward to covering it, and we hope you will all enjoy us for the ride. Pat, before we wrap it up, do you have anything that you want to plug?
I've got kind of a quiet week, but I have the aforementioned piece on Stephen Thompson, whether he is the UFC's welterweight heir apparent. Basically, how does he match up with Tyron Woodley, or more likely with Robbie Lawler coming out of UFC 201? Because that has to be the fight that gets made.
Absolutely.
And then I think I'll be doing a little something on UFC 200, more on the business side of it, focusing on what the UFC is missing by not having Conor McGregor on the card. Like, given that UFC 200 is still an awesome card, I think we're all excited to watch the fights that are going to be on there. But what the UFC is giving up by not having McGregor's charismatic presence around it, both money-wise and kind of in the broader sense, what having Conor McGregor at the top of a card means.
Yeah, they would have pissed everybody off by having McGregor in a non-title welterweight fight above the title fights, but they decided to just go ahead and have Brock Lesnar Mark Hunt over a title fight anyway. So they got the worst of both worlds.
Yeah. So the interesting thing, and I'll kind of give away the argument to this piece, is that it's not just that the UFC is giving up pay-per-view buys by not having Conor McGregor on that card. It's that they have to spend a lot more money out of their coffers to promote it, because McGregor is such a desirable guest for free media that, like, yeah, that McGregor can generate interest without you having to spend money.
Although one of the main points of McGregor's beef was that he didn't want to do the media.
It's not so much about doing press conferences and stuff. It's that you may not be able to get Conor McGregor to go run to a stupid ass press conference in Stockton.
The Who Gives a Fuck morning show with Tim and Susie.
Yeah, but you bet your ass Conor McGregor is going to be willing to go on the Jimmy Fallon show. You know?
Oh, sure, yeah.
So stuff like that. But that's basically what I'll be writing about.
Yeah, all right, well, that sounds very interesting, Pat. That sounded very disingenuous, by the way. That does really sound very interesting. For me, as I said, coming out day of this article, check it out. I've got a very in-depth breakdown of the technical nitty-gritty that took place in Rory MacDonald versus Stephen Thompson, and then it's just a load of UFC 200 and UFC Fight Week stuff coming from me. I'm going to have a series of videos talking about Brock Lesnar's return and Jon Jones versus Daniel Cormier. And then I am going to try in the coming weeks to do a lot of stuff focusing on the matchups in a very in-depth way. I want to do I've had my gaps in the armor pieces in the past, game planning to defeat champions. I would like to do one for both Jon Jones and Daniel Cormier, because both of them have a very tall task in front of them. Daniel Cormier has to beat the best in the world. Jon Jones has to defeat the world champion. And so I think both of those guys will need basically the perfect game plan to beat each other. And I'm interested to see who can execute, and I'm interested to see really what I come up with, see what I think are the key points. Those are always fun to write, and we'll see what else I can squeeze in. As I said, there's too much stuff to cover. I'd love to talk about all of it, but I'm not sure that I'll be able to. And then, Pat, I suppose since we're going to do it this week, we can probably let the lid off of this, that we are going to be trying to do a classic commentary for UFC 100. This is something that, if it proves profitable enough for us, not to sound like money grubbers, but if it proves something that you people are actually interested in buying, we'd like to do this more often. What we're going to do is we're going to have the whole main event, the whole main card of classic events, and Pat and I are going to do, like we did for the Heavy Hands livecast, we're going to sit down together and record commentary. We will share funny anecdotes, we will break down the fights as they play out, and talk about them with the advantage of some historical perspective. And for our very first one, celebrating the return of Brock Lesnar, and the possible return of GSP against Mike Bisping. Don't we all want to see that? We're going to be breaking down UFC 100, and we will be offering that, I think, on Bandcamp, probably for $3. So a $3 purchase. If you guys are interested in that, if you want to revisit the UFC's last major landmark event, still the highest selling pay-per-view in history and a truly momentous occasion, then buy that and listen along as we watch it with you. So we hope you enjoy that. We are looking forward to doing it, and we are really looking forward to UFC Fight Week. Thanks again to Demetrious Johnson for sitting down with us for this interview, and I think that's about it. If you guys came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.